Why do you think that as a kid you were having these disturbed nocturnal fantasies? What was going on
I have no
in
idea.
the family? Were you being brutalised?
No, not at all. I mean, I used to cop a fair few hidings at school and so forth, and we moved around a lot, so I kept getting, new batches of assailants everywhere we went. But no, it wasn't a particularly traumatic childhood. I have no idea.
Why were you picked on at school? I was too, but I can think of some very good reasons.
Well, I particularly went, by the time I went to high school, I was A, tall and skinny, B, I was a self-confessed art lover, and the only talents that I possessed were playing the piano and drawing pictures. Well, draw your own conclusions.
But couldn't you use the ability to draw as a way of negotiating? I remember when Bruce Petty went to Asia and living in the villages, the whole community would gather around him and he'd be sitting there doing little squiggly drawings, and they were enchanted by him.
And, well, I think I became a cartoonist at Beacon Hill High School, which was the most hostile of the environment that I ever found myself in during my school years. And because kids like me with an interest in art and music were treated with deep suspicion, as you know. But when they'd found that I had an ability to draw caricatures of the teachers in sexual congress with one another,
hero.
Then suddenly they said, he's not a bad bloke, he's a bit of a queer, but he's not a bad bloke.
Let's go back to that first pleasant dream. What was it about?
I'm not really sure. That was when I was living in Germany and I was about 28. And all I know is that I woke up with this blissful feeling thinking, I didn't have a nightmare last night. I was dreaming about something really beautiful. And the number of nightmares that I have has returned to what I'd consider the sort of normal standard. I have the occasional horrible dream, but I don't have hallucinations. And like I used to actually physically wake up, but the dream would still be all of the sounds of the dream and the physical sensations dream, it was a nightmare, the physical sensations would continue. I still remember one night when I was about 17 years of age.
Oliver Sacks would love you.
Yeah, I think we'd get along well together. Yeah. But I remember when I was about 17 waking up one night and I thought, I'm covered in blood. And I could feel it all over my face, and I thought, I'm drenched in blood. And I could still sort of hear noises and things like that. And I had to go to the bathroom, and I went in there and I thought, I'm not going to look in the mirror. I will not look in the mirror because I don't want to see myself covered in blood. And then the rational part of the brain said, you are not covered in blood. Look at yourself in the mirror. So I looked at myself in the mirror, and sure enough, I was covered in blood. And that sent me hurtling back to bed and lying down and thinking, I think I'm crazy.
Why were you covered in blood?
Well, it's just something I saw. I believed it, so I saw
see.
it.
You were projecting that image
yes, I projected
into the mirror.
I wasn't, in fact, covered in blood at all, but when I looked at myself, I believed that I was. That's how I saw myself.
You must have dreaded going to sleep at night.
I hated going to sleep. I hated it, and I used to put it off, and so I was, I'm complete insomniac too.
That's something else we have in common, isn't it? Insomnia.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. You're waking up. Your son is trying to explain to you what's happened. You argue that it didn't happen. You discover, belatedly, that yes, you've had some operations on the noggin. When did people explain to you how close you'd been to bucket kicking?
It's hard to actually say because for the first few weeks, I was hallucinating constantly, but not these were not your sort of wild, nice Las Vegas style hallucinations. These were just real things that I believed were real, happening around me that I was subsequently discovered weren't real at all. For example, my girlfriend at the time, Lou, her mother, her name was Yuk, and she has a sister called Hong. And I was lying in the bed talking to my own sister, Lynn, and my mother, and I saw Hong and Yook enter the ward. And I thought, oh, that's nice, they've come to see me. So I called them over and I introduced them to my mother and my sister. And we carried on a perfectly agreeable conversation for what I thought was about 20 minutes, and then they had to leave. And that was simply a real experience. And then,
but it shows, doesn't it, the great power of the brain to manifest images.
Well, it does.
And to project them onto the world and around.
The funniest thing about that particular one, and the reason why I mentioned that one, was that months later I was talking to my mother and I said, you know, it continues to baffle me that more and more things are coming to light that I thought happened when I was in the hospital and in the subsequent couple of months when I was at home that didn't really happen at all. And she said, oh, yeah, she said, one of the funniest was that night when you thought that Lou's mother and her sister had come to visit, and you introduced Lynn and I to them both and carried on a conversation with all four of us. And I said, oh, really? Because at that point, I still believed that was a true experience.
Are you still hallucinating a little from time to time?
No, I don't think so.
It's all gone?
No, I think...
Where do you think you are at the moment?
I think I'm sitting in your studio.
Well, you see, there you go.
You see?
There you go. You
For
have
all
a rich
I know,
fantasy life,
for all
but it's
I know,
bullshit.
you mightn't be there.
I'm not.
It does worry me from time to time. But I have to tell you that I was incredibly lucky. Incredibly lucky. I don't even know where to start when it comes to saying how lucky I was. But when I fell off Singo's balcony, I was at a party. 10 minutes before I had the accident, a couple arrived, and they were both paramedics, and they knew exactly what to do to, in order to treat me while waiting for the helicopter to arrive.
This is like the wonderful stories about Robin Williams and Norman Swan. You remember when Robin carks it, and the good Dr. Swan's on the task and brings him back.
Well, it's almost as remarkable, because then John rang the air ambulance, and 2 weeks or so before my accident, John had found some people wandering around, bewildered and dehydrated and starving on his property. And they'd been lost in the bush for a few weeks. And so he had to get the air ambulance to them. And
so he knew the ropes.
Well, not that he knew the ropes, but he got onto a pilot and he had to stay in constant touch with the pilot to guide him to where he could pick these people up. And it's fairly rugged terrain, and the helicopter pilot had enormous difficulty finding them. And when I had my accident, John rang and talked to the air ambulance, got the same pilot. And he said, do you remember where you came a couple of weeks ago to my place to pick up those people who had been lost in the bush? He said, yeah, well, come there again. And he was there in about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And even in the ward, in the intensive care unit, when I was there, a young man was brought in, and if you described the accident that he had, it was exactly the same as mine. He fell backwards off a balcony, banged his head. And he suffered very, very serious spinal injuries, and it affected a part of his brain, which it's the part of the brain that enables you to understand your physical context, your physical environment. And he had lost that, and it's not something that's easily retrievable. And the spinal injuries meant that he'd spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. And I thought, the same thing happened to me, and I've had really no severe brain damage that's altered the way that I can think or the way that I can respond to things.
Are you the same bloke entirely?
I think so. I've redefined the word headache.
This is interrogation is taking place in cell block 43, Late Night Live on ABC Radio National, etc. We're resuming the interrogation of Bill Leake, which we started a few weeks ago. Okay, Bill, had you ever, in your youth, up until the time of the accident, contemplated your own mortality to any extent? Had you ever thought how we were always skating on the thin ice of life, that at any minute the ice is going to crack and into the cold water you go?
No, not to that extent. No, I mean, I was a manic depressive before it became fashionable. I mean, now people proudly I'm bipolar and proud. It's almost a prerequisite if you want some kind of notoriety. But I was sort of born bipolar, and so I was used to massive mood swings, and I was used to periods of terrible depression. And even as a kid, I remember reading about the lives of the great explorers and wondering why they bothered. I used to think, Leichhardt, for example, I used to think, if you're only, as a 5 or 6 year old kid, I worked out that if you were only happy when you were laughing, and you were flat out if you found yourself laughing for more than 5 or 10 minutes a day. And I thought, there's a bloke who would have set off from Sydney, and he's gone for 18 months, and I thought, I bet he didn't laugh once. I bet he wasn't happy once. Why didn't he just commit suicide before he left and save himself a lot of trouble?
Burke and Wills piss themselves all the time. I haven't know. Voss, laughing. He was like a stand-up comic. He'd go out there in the middle of the sticks and do a performance for the local Aborigines. You see, you got that wrong. Explorers...
Well, not all of them.
Look at Captain Bligh.
Yeah, Burke and Wills, though, I have to admit, they were a couple of cards.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I used to think about mortality, but not in the sense that I was worried about some kind of, getting old and becoming infirm, or that I might walk around the corner and get hit by a car or something. But when it does happen, it gives you a new appreciation of the fact that you've come close.
Are you living as a consequence more intensely, perhaps more carefully?
Definitely more carefully. My enjoyment of things is more intense than it was before, because I realise how precious they are. Mind you, people always talk about the mental and psychological effects of brain damage. In my case, it's been much more physical. I just find, the things that I used to do with great ease now make me very tired, physically tired, and things that I used to do without thinking too much now stress me out.
I didn't know about this bipolar childhood or background of yours, because the Bill Leake I've known is always cheerful, very gregarious.
Very.
You like people, you like interacting with them, always laughing.
That's right.
Perhaps...
A lot of comedians are like that too, of course.
But that's often a very unconvincing veneer over, the numbers of comedians I know well enough to know that that's camouflage. There's legion. But are you happier now than you were? In other words, are you less bipolar? Are you more polar, less bi? Or?
I'm not really sure. I think, as I said, things stress me out a little bit more. Even when it comes to my work as a cartoonist, I still love drawing cartoons. I just love doing it. But the process I find extremely enervating, much more so than I used to. And I find that I get myself into, a state of considerable anxiety as the deadline approaches, to an extent that I didn't before.
And if anyone's got to be under stress for deadlines, it's a cartoonist.
Well, Bill Mitchell once said, he said, the cartoonist only has to be funny once a day, but it's a bloody sight harder than you'd think.